This one time, my friend told me that her mom was adopted, and then I convinced her that her grandma probably kidnapped her mom as a baby because I knew her grandma, and there was no way in hell anybody gave Winifred a baby. That woman had been a raging alcoholic since she was like 12. She worked at a liquor store her entire life, and she lived in a rundown one-bedroom trailer. Absolutely nobody stepped foot in that trailer, met Winnie, and was like, yes, you seem like the perfect candidate for adoption. You're exactly who I want to raise my baby. Not even in the 60s did that happen, okay? And so then I got her on board with my whole conspiracy, and we went and started researching babies that had been kidnapped or went missing in the area that her mom was born during that time frame, and we found one that fit pretty well. And so she decided to do an ancestry DNA test to see if she matched any of that baby's family. And while we were waiting for the results to come back, we ended up down this other rabbit hole of that area in Alaska. There's this whole group of moms who had given birth and then been told that their babies died, and they were never given any proof. They never got to see their baby, and so they were convinced that the hospital was doing this huge scandal where they were selling babies, right? And we're like, what if your mom was one of these babies? But then the DNA test comes back and she matches her mom's biological father. And this guy messages her instantly. Literally, the day the DNA match hits, he sends her a message and is like, hey, I took every DNA test years ago, hoping to one day be able to connect with the baby that I gave up for adoption. And I'm like, who the heck gave Winnie this freaking baby? And it turns out it was some crazy church scandal. So him and his high school sweetheart got pregnant young, and their families were super religious and did not want anybody to know about this because they were very against teenage pregnancies, very against premarital stuff. And so the families arranged for the baby to go to a well-off conservative family within the church, and they were going to raise the baby. And then when the biological parents were of age, they were supposed to get that information to be able to contact the baby if they wanted to. Biological parents end up getting married and having kids of their own, and then wanting to contact the baby they gave up for adoption. The records don't exist because the church did not do what they said they were going to do. Instead, they sold the baby to Winnie for $2,000. So all this time, he thought that his baby was being raised in some conservative, well-off Christian family, but instead, she was raised by Winnie the alcoholic. One time I told my friend not to sleep with this guy because I thought he was a loser, and she didn't listen to me, and she slept with him anyway. She got pregnant by him, and then she had a daughter with him. And then when I was in college, she told me that I could write a paper on her family because I found it interesting that her mom was adopted, but who would let her grandma adopt a baby? Because I knew her grandma, and there's no way. And so I had to build her family tree to try to figure out who her mom's biological parents are. And when I did that, I added her daughter to the tree, and then I added her daughter's father. And then I started nosing into his business and his family tree. And I discovered that he's from this tiny incest town in middle of nowhere, Idaho. And at one point in time, everybody in that town had to have been related because these four families moved there from Virginia, and instead of leaving the town to find people to date, they just dated, married, and procreated with each other over and over for generations. And it got to the point that the children were not surviving past childhood anymore because they were being born so deformed and having so many health issues. And then some babies just were not surviving, and the death certificates literally said stuff like the parents were triple related, so the baby wasn't capable of surviving, and all of this stuff. I ended up writing my paper on his family instead of her family because I found the rampant incest in that town to be so fascinating. And I'm telling you this because I want you to keep this in mind. Next time your friend tells you not to sleep with some guy because he's a loser, she might be saving you from sleeping with some guy who comes from hundreds of years of incest. Last 10 years, I've been collecting people's DNA, and my sister's been collecting ex-wives. So naturally, whenever she gets a new wife, I immediately ask them to spit in a tube for me so that I can map out their family tree and then connect their DNA to verify my accuracy. Now, luckily for me, whenever this ends in divorce, they never remember to ask for custody back of their spit. So I get to keep it and keep watching their DNA matches and looking for anything suspicious. Now, my sister has this one ex-wife who is very inbred, and she warned me from the start that I was going to find that on her tree, but she assured me it's very common where she's from. She was from Ecuador. I have no idea if that's true or not, but I do know that when I added her dad's family to her tree, I immediately started noticing the exact same last name pop up everywhere. Now, I'm talking all four of her great-grandparents have this last name because they are all related in some way, and she never gets any new DNA matches because the majority of her family still lives in Ecuador, but she got one today, and it was a very high match. It was a 3,000 centimorgan DNA match, and if you're unfamiliar with DNA, that's about how much DNA I share with my sister, and she is my full sibling. That is a very high DNA match, and so I was like, that's weird because I knew both of her parents, and I knew her siblings, and I have never seen that person before in my life. So I started investigating, and I realized that's a 60-something-year-old woman. So there's no way that could be a sibling because that's about how old her parents are. So then I dig into that woman's family tree, and I realized that that is her aunt. There is so much overlapping inbred DNA that woman, her aunt, matches her with so much DNA, it could be the equivalent to like a full sibling. Absolutely wild, but it did answer some questions on where her and my sister's marriage went wrong, and I do believe it is because my sister is not her cousin. And my friend told me she was adopted and asked if I could find out who her biological parents were for her. And I was like, yeah, totally. Just spit in this tube, right? She did. I found out who her biological parents were. I found all her original birth records. And then I started digging into her biological family and their family history. And I discovered her biological parents got married when they were 18. They had 2 kids. Then when they were 28, they had her and gave her up for adoption. And then less than 11 months later, they had another baby, which they kept. And then a year later had another baby, which they kept. So then I gave her all this information and she's like, well, I didn't plan on contacting these people, but now I kind of want to know why I was the only baby given up for adoption, right? And so she reached out to her oldest biological brother, who would have been 10 when she was born. And she was like, hey, do you remember your mom being pregnant during this period of time? And he's like, yeah, but why do you know that? And she's like, well, I'm that baby. I'm your biological sister. And he's like, no, that's not possible. That baby was stillborn. So she sent back her birth record showing it was a live birth and was like, no, I was born alive and given up for adoption. And he called her a scammer and then blocked her. And then a week later, he unblocks her and apologizes and is like, sorry, I talked to my mom and she admitted that the baby was born alive and she gave the baby up for adoption. So you might be telling the truth. And she was like, that's great, but I only contacted you because I wanted to know why I was given up for adoption. And he said that his mom told him that it was because right before she was born, they started printing warning labels on alcohol bottles that said that you can't drink while you're pregnant, and their mother had been drinking her entire pregnancy. And so then she thought the baby was going to be born messed up and have problems, and she wasn't equipped to take care of a baby with problems. So she gave that baby up for adoption, went home, and immediately started trying for a different healthy baby. A year ago, this girl messaged me on Ancestry and she's like, hey, I noticed we share the same 3rd grade grandparents. Do you by chance have any photos of them? And I was like, I totally do. I actually have a whole file on them. I can send it to you, but I can't send it on Ancestry. If you want to message me on Instagram, I'll send it to you there. So she sent me a message on Instagram and I sent her the file, and then she talked to me a little bit about her family line and sent me some photos that she had so I could put it on my tree. And then we stopped talking after that, but like a day or 2 later, she started sending me reels. And they were like reels that you would send to people that you know in real life. Like, send this to somebody that you want to do this with. Send this to somebody that you think would enjoy this. Yada, yada, yada. And she was like sending like a sentence with every single reel. And I was like, what on earth is going on? But at the same time, I come from an insane family, like literally insane, not figuratively insane. Like, these people have been declared legally insane by the government. And there has been multiple instances in my family line where my family has literally been killing each other. So I wasn't trying to take any chances with my newfound cousin. I don't know how much of my family crazy she was dabbling in. So I was just playing it cool. I was heart reacting everything that she was sending me, and I just wasn't responding. And then like a month ago, after she'd been doing this for like 10 months, she sends me this whole paragraph apologizing to me, telling me that she just realized that she had been sending all of these to the wrong person, and now I probably think she's insane. And I was like, oh no, it's all good, ha ha ha. And now it's been like a month of her not sending me reels, and I kind of miss my cousin. My husband's grandpa died, except for he didn't, because when I asked if I should take time off work to go to his funeral, my husband told me that wasn't actually his grandpa. I was like, what do you mean that's not actually your grandpa? We had been together for like 15 years at that point in time. Everybody in his family called Earl grandpa. He was like, yeah, I think he's just like my grandma's 3rd husband or something. And I was like, well, then who's your grandpa? And he told me he doesn't actually know who his grandpa is and that I should ask his mom. So I went to my mother-in-law and I was like, hey, who's your biological dad? Because your son doesn't know. And she was like, oh yeah, I don't actually know either. I was like, what do you mean you don't know? You're like 50 something years old. And she told me that her mom refused to tell her entire life, and she would just get more mad every single time she asked, so she just stopped asking. And I was like, aren't you concerned? You're from a small town. What if you dated your cousin or something? Don't you have any curiosity about who your biological dad is? She's like, yeah, of course I'm curious about who it is, but I don't know how to go about it because every time I do, it just makes my mother mad. And I was like, luckily for you, I don't care if I make Karen mad. I've been beefing with that lady since 2008 over green beans, and I have children comprised of 25% of your DNA. And so if you want to know who your biological dad is, I can 100% figure it out. And she was like, yeah, I think I'd like to know. So then I DNA tested my older son, and I went through his matches, and then I went through their family trees and the historical records, and I figured out who my mother-in-law's biological father was. And then I went and I stalked him down on social media. He had a joint Facebook account with his wife, who he was married to when my mother-in-law was born. And I told my mother-in-law and my husband, and then they told everybody else in the family, and we all watched him on social media, watched his life unfold, because he had a public account for 2 years until he died from medical malpractice, not knowing that his daughter, his grandchildren, and his great-grandson were all watching his entire life for 2 years. Over 1 out of every 10 people are wrong about who their dad is. Some of y'all need to pause and rewind and listen to that again. It's really not that big of a deal. It was fairly common back in like our parents' and grandparents' ages, which is honestly kind of comical to think about, because those generations judged Gen Z and millennial the hardest for not getting married young. And it's like, you guys were married young and still wilding out. Anyways, if you decide to take a DNA test for funsies and that test comes back and it doesn't match what you were told about your family history, the test isn't wrong. What you were told is wrong, not science. Science is still right, even if you just took the test for fun. And I'm going to use this as an example, and some of y'all are going to know why I'm going to use this as an example. But if you were told your whole life your grandpa is 100% Italian, and your grandpa spoke Italian, he immigrated here from Italy, his parents still lived in Italy, and you are 0% Italian, and you do not match anybody with your grandpa's last name or his family last names on your DNA matches, that man's not your grandpa. The test isn't wrong. The test didn't just leave out your grandfather's information. The test is still right. Science is still right. The test isn't lying to you. Your grandma's lying to you.